A Tale of a Muslim Girl and Her Infidel Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Before we dive into the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader that this novel is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. The Muslim Apostate Girl and Her Apostate Infidel Lover. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the real life of a Muslim girl in Sudan. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 1. Your Mother Has Come to Meet You. The Sudanese author's controversial book stirred so much anger and resentment in the hearts of Muslims all over the world. The new book of Dr. Ibtihal made each and every Muslim hates its author with bitterness, and their hatred turned into vengeful spirit of revenge. Muslims in Western countries demanded the book should be placed under ban. Its author Dr. Ibtihal must be prosecuted for insulting the Prophet Muhammad, who was sent by God as a mercy to mankind, and viciously attacking Islam, which is euphemistically called the religion of peace. In London, where she is living, Muslims went to the streets and chanted verses from the Quran and demanded the condemnation of the Sudanese author of the provocative book. The Muslim terrorists are neither criminals nor victims, but they are demon-possessed murderers. Their protests were supported by some non-Muslims who believe in religious tolerance. Those critics who are like whitewashed tombs, but inside full of dead bones and hypocrisies, believe no one has the right to criticize even Satan worshippers. Nevertheless, the government of the UK did neither accept their demands nor bring the controversial Sudanese author to justice. The police authority in London restricted the movements of Dr. Ibtihal for safety purposes. She was advised to avoid any public appearance and to confine herself as much as possible to the YWCA. Dr. Ibtihal watched the controversies and the reactions that her book stirred up. She saw on the TV many Islamic clerics being interviewed and heard their negative comments on her book. She also heard the views of those who disagreed with her among the non-Muslims. Many media people tried to engage her in interviews, but she refused their requests. Some Muslim scholars wanted to debate her on what she wrote about Islam in her book, but she declined their demands too. She decided to allow her book to speak for her. She wants Muslim scholars to write their refutations of her book, if they have any, and publish them as books for everyone to read, and decide whether she was wrong or right in her critique of Islam. One morning, while Dr. Ibtihal was still sleeping in her room, someone from the staff in the YWCA came and woke her up. "Your mother has come to meet you," said a pretty British lady to Ibtihal. "My mother," said the Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal in great astonishment. "My mother died when I was a small girl. An old woman has come, and now she is sitting in the guest room. She said she is your mom." "She is not my mom. I have no mother. My mother died a long time ago. But she said she is your mom. How does she look? I mean, is she a black African woman, or a reddish in complexion like an Arab woman?" "She looks like an African woman." "At least come and meet her." "No, I am suspicious of a person like that. I think we need to inform the police." "The police? She is just an old woman. Maybe she is your relative, but she calls you her daughter. Everyone in my family hates me, and if he finds me, he will kill me for sure as a Muslim apostate girl. Do you want me to tell her that you don't want to see her?" "Don't do that. She may harm you and harm other young women in the YWCA. I am sure this is a Muslim terrorist who has come to kill me. Are you crazy? This woman is too old and cannot kill even a cat. I must call the police myself. Don't do a crazy thing like that. The frightened girl Ibtihal ignored the overconfident British lady, picked up the phone, and dialed 911. Yes, this is the London police. I am calling from the Young Women's Christian Association. I have a visitor whom I am suspecting she has come to kill me. She is an old woman who claimed to be my mother. I have no mother. My mom died when I was a child. What is your name? My name is Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin. I am the Sudanese writer who had recently authored the controversial book that created uneasiness among Muslims. I see. Now I know who is talking to me. But do you think the woman may have some explosive device with her? I don't know. Have you seen her? I have not seen her yet. She may have something dangerous concealed in her bag or beneath her clothes. She is waiting to meet me in the guest room. Okay, some police officers will be there soon. Stay away from her until the police arrive at the YWCA. Are you serious about your complaint? Asked the British lady who came to inform Ibtihal about the unwanted guest. Yes, I am serious. I don't think anyone would come to visit me at this hour of the day. I have no friends or relatives in London. Now I am also scared to go back to her. Just stay with me here until the London police come. Shortly after her complaint, Dr. Ibtihal heard the YWCA Centre administration started to announce Code Black for a bomb threat. The London police had already contacted the front desk of the YWCA and reported the serious complaint they had received from one of the girls. The authority requested every resident to stay in her room until further notice. 10 minutes later, the YWCA authority announced that every resident should try to escape out of the building. It happened to be that the Women's Center is located on the first floor of the building. Therefore, the Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal and the British lady with her have broken the window and jumped out of the room. They landed safely in the street. When Dr. Ibtihal came out, she found the street was full of cops and a fleet of police cars. Even some ambulances and fire trucks were there. She had been told by the police officers to go far away from the building. While Dr. Ibtihal was moving away, she felt as if the ground beneath her had opened up and a huge explosion occurred. It was immediately followed by two powerful explosions. The building that she left just minutes ago went crumbling down like a skyscraper wrecked by a powerful earthquake. While Dr. Ibtihal was escaping, a few pieces of shattered glass and bricks hit her. She fell twice, but she managed to stand up and continue to run for her dear life. Some people collided with each other and fell in the street. The cops too ran away. The quiet street suddenly became a place of panic and chaos. People were running and screaming. A huge amount of smoke and dust filled the atmosphere and buried everyone inside. Dr. Ibtihal was breathing with difficulty, while she was still trying to emerge out of the dangerous zone. She was moving aimlessly. She was trying to run as far as she could to escape the terrorist attack on the YWCA. While she was running, she understood that she was the main target of that cowardly terrorist attack. She prayed to God that no one would be harmed or get killed because of her. After running for half an hour, Dr. Ibtihal realized that she had reached a safe place and became out of danger. She stopped and sat near a store. It was still early morning when she stopped running and sat down to rest. Chapter 2. The aftermath of the terrorist attack on the YWCA. The Islamic terrorist attack on the Young Women's Christian Association killed 50 residents and wounded over 100 people, including police officers. Among the dead, there were 36 girls from the Women's Center. The damage that was caused to the YWCA building and the surrounding buildings was estimated at over $1 billion. The attack had targeted the Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihol, but instead of the main targeted controversial writer, many other innocent people were killed, and many more got seriously injured. Even so, the controversial author's wise decision of informing the police prior to the attack saved the lives of hundreds of people living in that tall building. Most of those victims who got killed were residents of the YWCA. The victims were those unlucky innocent young women who were trapped inside the premises because their rooms did not face any street. When they heard the bomb threat alarm and asked to escape for their lives, the Muslim terrorist woman was alerted as soon as she saw the residents trying to escape out of the place. She thought the hated author of the provocative anti-Islamic book was one of them, and hence she pressed the button of the explosive device that was attached to her body and took along with her the lives of many innocent girls of the Women's Center. The initial investigation of the police authority revealed that there were 2 cars loaded with powerful explosives parked inside the parking lot of the building. Those 2 cars had brought the entire building down when they exploded. Fortunately, the police authority managed to evacuate many of the residents of the building just a few minutes before those powerful explosions had erupted. Most of the victims were prevented from escaping when the building collapsed on them. Furthermore, the escape of the killed girls was blocked by the old woman. The police guessed that the old woman had a remote control for the cars, and was connected to all 3 explosive devices that were placed inside the 2 vehicles and her body. The first investigation that held the police's attention is how those 2 cars managed to get inside the parking lot of the building, which was located in the basement. There was a security guard who was not supposed to allow any outsider's car inside the parking lot. There was a designated parking area for visitors outside the building. After checking on the identity of the security guard and his background and religious affiliation, some of those questions began to make sense. He is a British citizen of Yemeni origin and a Muslim. The police suspected that the security guard most likely had a hand in the terrorist plot. His body was not found among the dead or the wounded. Most probably, he escaped prior to the explosions. The police placed his photo in the media and requested the public to inform the police authority wherever they saw him anywhere. The police also managed to get some surveillance cameras that were located on other surrounding buildings. Those surveillance cameras revealed the photo of the old woman who entered the YWCA and pretended to be the mother of the Sudanese apostate girl Dr. Ibtihol. Her photo matched the descriptions of an African Muslim woman who came as a visitor to London a few days prior to the terrorist attack. The old woman was originally from Nigeria and came to London for medical treatment. Therefore, the anti-terrorist police of London apologized to that African woman when it appeared that she was in the hospital recovering from back surgery at the time of the terrorist attack. However, the police continued the search for the identification of that evil old woman. The body of the Muslim terrorist woman was found among the dead, but her face was totally disfigured, and her body was shattered into many parts due to the impact of the explosion. The deadly terrorist attack on the Young Women's Christian Association alarmed the public in London of the danger associated with keeping the Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihol in any residential area in the city. The police authority also knew that the controversial author of the provocative book became a marked target for Islamic terrorists. They are not going to leave her until they take revenge on her for attacking their religion and prophet. For that reason, the Department of London Anti-Terrorist Police requested the UN office to move the Sudanese controversial author to another country, and preferably out of Europe. The UN office promised to try to send her for resettlement to another country, but that depends on whether any country will be willing to accept her. Meanwhile, the British Police Authority transferred Dr. Ibtihol to protected custody on the outskirts of London, and kept her new location hidden from the public and media. A few days after the terrorist attack, the Yemeni security guard was arrested while he was trying to escape from the UK. The British police found a huge amount of money in his possession. When he had been harshly interrogated, he admitted his involvement in the terrorist attack on the YWCA. According to his confession, he agreed to take part in the attack because some Muslims had bribed him. He claimed that he had no connection with those Muslim people except that they approached him and offered him a large amount of money. Consequently, he allowed them to get the two cars inside the parking lot of the building at 4:30 a.m. on the day of the attack. He denied any knowledge of the old woman who visited the YWCA. Those who bribed him didn't inform him about a suicide bomber. Then the anti-terrorist police of London were able to obtain information about the old woman's identity after some intelligence disclosed that she was part of a suspected religious group. The police had been watching the activities of that terrorist group for some time. For a long time, the police were carefully watching the activities of every male in that Islamic group. However, the police were not monitoring the activities of the women who were associated with that group. Most of those women were either too young or incredibly old, and therefore no British cop suspected that the Islamic group would use any of them for such a dangerous suicidal mission. There are a few young women who are all either students in schools or universities. Moreover, those women are close relatives to those Muslim men, such as wives, mothers, sisters, daughters, and grandmothers. As soon as the identity of the old woman was obtained, the anti-terrorist police made several arrests. The members of that group call themselves the Defenders of Islam. Their headquarters is in Cairo City, in Egypt. Their main goals are to punish anyone who speaks, writes, or does anything against the Holy Quran or the Prophet Muhammad. Their members swore allegiance to punish any such blasphemous person wherever he lives in the world. Even those Muslims who apostatized or speak against Islam will be tracked down and killed wherever they are. The police interrogations had revealed that the Defenders of Islam planned the attack after they knew the whereabouts of the so-called provocative author of the controversial book. Muslim terrorists are neither victims nor criminals, but demon-possessed people. The police were also able to extract from the members of the terrorist group how the plot was masterminded. First of all, the group came to know the place where the Sudanese apostate woman Dr. Ibtihal was living through the media. Then they contacted the Muslim security guard. The British Yemeni man agreed to allow them inside the building if they would pay him a certain amount of money. After that, the Islamic terrorist group drew two plans. The first plan was to kill the evil author Dr. Ibtihal through the old woman, who volunteered to blow herself up along with the accursed Sudanese apostate woman, who authored the provocative book against Islam, which included abominable blasphemies against the Holy Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. The terrorist group also plotted to destroy the entire building of the infidel Christian girls if their first plan wouldn't work. They stationed a couple of terrorists outside the building with remote controls. The old woman was supposed to phone those two Muslim men and inform them if she could not be able to meet the provocative author. They anticipated that the Sudanese girl Dr. Ibtihal might suspect her visit, and therefore inform the police of London. The old woman contacted the outside terrorists and told them about the delay of the Sudanese apostate girl. Then she called again and told them that the YWCA Center Authority suspected her visit and announced an alarm bomb threat. The terrorists told the old woman to carry out her sacrificial mission as soon as she would see the infidel residents were trying to escape. When the outside terrorists heard the first explosion, they pressed their remote controls and exploded the two cars that were stationed inside the parking lot in the basement. Then those two Muslim terrorists were arrested and interrogated by the police. They had revealed the details of their cowardly terrorist attack from A to Z, which targeted the controversial author of the provocative book, who happened to live in the YWCA. Chapter 3. The opinions of the critics on the controversial book of Dr. Ibtihal. The ex-Muslim girl Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin spent 1 month in a small house in the countryside on the outskirts of London City. She stayed by herself all the time inside a small room in a farmhouse. The house is owned by an old white husband and his Christian wife, who are tasked by the police of London with the duty of the protected custody of their guest. The old man is a retired cop. The couple is paid by the police of London for their custodian service they are rendering to the Sudanese girl. They are also paid for supplying their guest with food and her other daily needs. Dr. Ibtihol is restricted from venturing out of her protected custody. For a city girl like her in that remote farmhouse, daily life is awfully boring. There is nothing for her to see when she looks out of the window except cows and goats grazing on the farm. She could also hear the barking of dogs coming from another farm. Every now and then, she saw a frightened deer chased by a wild beast. She felt her life now resembled the life of one of those innocent deer. After the brutal slaughter of her dear lover, the late Dr. Samir, she became all alone in a hostile world that is infested by dangerous Muslim terrorists who are demon-possessed, and the devil is using them to terrorize those who disagree with them. She knew and understood that she was destined to be on the run for the rest of her life. The Muslim terrorists deprived her of her freedom and forced her to live underground. Why do Muslims kill the person who forsakes their Islamic religion or criticizes their Quran and Prophet? Why don't they allow those who disagree with them to live? Ibtihol knows that Muslims inherited that narrow mentality from their fanatic prophet who murdered those who criticized him. No followers of other religions kill those who criticize their religious books or the founders of their faiths. Luckily, in that isolated farmhouse, Dr. Ibtihol has a small TV in her room. She spends most of her time watching the TV and following the developments of the terrorist attack on the YWCA and the never-ending protests of the outraged Muslims against her supposedly provocative book. She became surprised to hear some Muslim leaders interviewed on some TV programs, saying that her controversial book did not include a reference to a single authentic hadith of the Prophet or cited one single verse from the Holy Quran. According to them, the stories and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad that she included in her provocative book were fabrications and additions done by the enemies of Islam. Those stories and sayings of the founder of Islam are called by the Muslim scholars the Israeliyat. By that they meant, those false stories and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad were created by the bitter enemies of Islam, the Jews, and they injected and hid them inside the Islamic authentic books. However, those leaders had not mentioned any particular story or hadith or explained how the Jews managed to trick the Muslims, and added those stories and hadiths to their authentic books such as Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, al-Tabari, al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Sa'd, al-Bahaqi, Ibn Hisham, among others. Al Jazeera TV interviewed some Muslim scholars or ulama of Al-Azhar al-Sharif University. Those religious scholars admitted the authenticity of some stories and hadiths that the Sudanese apostate woman cited in her offensive book, but they argued that she misquoted and misrepresented them. They also contended that she played with the verses of the Holy Quran by quoting them out of their contexts. Those religious scholars likewise had not given a specific example of a hadith, story, or verse to prove their objections against the new book of the so-called lying apostate Muslim woman Ibtihol. Some African American religious leaders argued that the Sudanese author might be right in her criticisms of the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of the Holy Quran, but they criticized her for using our modern values and moral standards to judge the desert society of the Arab people who lived in the 7th century. To prove their points, they contended that in the near past, slavery was legal in the USA, and no one was socially condemned or legally prosecuted in those days by the law for owning slaves. But today, slavery is condemned legally and morally all over the world. Some feminists had also used the lack of women's rights in the recent past as an example to support their arguments against the controversial book of the Sudanese author Ibtihol. According to those atheist feminists, in the past women were treated as inferiors to men and owned as animals and properties, and abused as wives and prostitutes by their male counterparts. But today, women are equal to men in every respect. Dr. Ibtihol knew that those kinds of arguments could not be applied to Islam because Muslim women are still treated as lower than the animals. Moreover, the analogy used in such contentions runs the risk of refuting the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, which Muslim scholars throughout the history of Islam held as applicable to all times and all places. In addition, slavery has not been abolished in Islam, and is not condemned by Muslim scholars until today. There is a huge branch of the Sharia called fiqh al-Araqiy, or the science of slavery, which is taught until our present day in Al-Azhar al-Sharif University, and many Islamic schools and colleges in the Muslim world. Furthermore, women did not and would not be likely to obtain their rights in Muslim countries, and any attempt to make them equal to their male counterparts will be contested by Muslim scholars and preachers as teaching going against the verses of the Holy Quran and the authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad on women. In fact, Islamic law legally distinguishes between man and woman, Muslim and non-Muslim, and free person and slave person until this moment. Until now, the testimony of one man equals the testimony of two women in court, and the inheritance of one man equals the inheritance of two women. Besides that, the Sharia does not permit a woman to be a president, judge, imama, caliph, or lead men in any other way. According to Islamic law, a Muslim must not be killed for killing a non-Muslim such as a Christian, Jew, Hindu, and Buddhist, whereas a non-Muslim should be put to death for killing a Muslim man or a Muslim a woman. Foreign maidservants in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates who come from countries like India, Pakistan, Philippines, Indonesia, Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya or Egypt are treated as slaves, and their fatwas issued by prominent religious scholars to permit having sexual intercourse with them out of the marriage bonds even against their wishes. Therefore, the arguments of those African American scholars and Muslim feminists can hold good only if half of the hostile teachings of the Quran and the misogynistic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are discarded as inapplicable in our modern time. The hiding author Ibtihal also heard the views of some non-Muslim critics, who claimed that her controversial book included hate crimes against all Muslims of the world. Those critics based their critiques on the ground that the Muslim apostate woman Dr. Ibtihal authored her book in response to the tragic murder of her late Christian lover Dr. Samir Peter Deng, who was assassinated by some fanatic terrorists in Chad. They contended that since only 4 Muslim terrorists beheaded her hostage Sudanese lover, why then should all Muslims in the world collectively bear the consequence of the evil deed of a few fanatic Muslims? Dr. Ibtihal felt sad that those critics had not paid attention to the theme and aim of her book, which is to expose, fight, and cut Islamic terrorism from its roots. She made it noticeably clear in the introduction of the book that her book is not meant to attack or offend Muslims, but to uproot the foundation on which Muslim terrorists based and justified their cruel punishment of innocent people who have no hand in what made them angry. For example, she referred to the victims of the cowardly terrorist attacks on New York, London, Madrid, Paris, Athens, Bombay, and the many daily suicidal killings in Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Libya, Sri Lanka, among others. Those critics could not see even the recent tragedy of the innocent young women who were cruelly murdered in the YWCA in London. The Muslim terrorists are prepared to bomb 10 American airplanes, 10 trains, 10 movie theaters, 10 restaurants, and 10 American embassies if 2 American soldiers in Iraq killed by mistake 10 Iraqi people. Chapter 4. The Crisis of the Muslim Terrorists in the UK. The Canadian Embassy in London accepted the controversial Sudanese author Ibtihal's application for resettlement. The British Police Authority notified her that she would be flown soon to Canada. The police of London preferred to keep the matter hidden from the media for security purposes. The Sudanese author Ibtihal received an official letter from the Canadian Embassy via the police authority. Along with the letter, the Canadian Embassy sent to her a visa and an air ticket. With the arrangements with the UN office and the police authority in London, the Canadian Embassy obtained Ibtihal's emergency documents from the Red Cross. Those documents could allow her to travel to her new resettlement without a passport. Then the hiding author Dr. Ibtihal has been informed that she is scheduled to fly to Toronto City through a Canadian airline. Her trip is a direct flight from London to Toronto without stopping. Unfortunately, a couple of days before Ibtihal is supposed to fly to Canada, something terrible has happened in the UK which turned the world upside down. The people in London have woken up on a Sunday morning by the disturbing news that some Islamic terrorists took over 500 people as hostages in one of the biggest hospitals in the capital city of the United Kingdom. Those Muslim terrorists threatened to blow their bodies up and kill all the patients, medical staff, employees, and workers in the hospital if their demand would not be fulfilled. They demanded that the government of the UK must hand over to them the Sudanese provocative author Ibtihal Taha al-Amin within 24 hours. They said they want to punish her for maliciously attacking their sacred book of the Quran and insulting their infallible prophet Muhammad. The Islamic terrorists entered the hospital at midnight and killed a few guards before they took as hostages everybody found inside that big medical facility. Then they blocked all the doors of the hospital and stationed a couple of their suicidal terrorists at each door. The British police estimated that in each room and passage in the hospital the terrorists placed 2 or 3 of their men. The police authority is certain that each and every one of the Islamic terrorists has an explosive device attached to his body. All the terrorists are armed with AK-47 Kalashnikovs. The anti-terrorist police of London are worried that the terrorists may cause heavy casualties in human lives if the government of the UK cannot handle the crisis with care. Some top officials in the government suggested that there must be negotiations with the terrorists. The government must do everything it can to end peacefully the terrorist crisis in the London hospital. In the Muslim world, people went into the streets in support of the daring action of those zealous Muslims in the UK. The supporters chanted verses from the Quran and demanded that the blasphemous author must be handed over to the Muslim zealots to be put to death for insulting their peaceful religion and hurting the religious sentiments of over 1 billion Muslims all over the world. The controversial author's caricature was burned in many big cities in the Arab and Muslim world. While the terrorist crisis in London is going on, people heard other 2 disturbing reports that came from Sudan and Lebanon, adding to the tragedy of the UK. In Khartoum City, on a Sunday morning, the Muslim terrorists took over 200 members of a large Roman Catholic church as hostages inside their spacious prayer hall. In Beirut City, a Christian school that has around 700 students was seized by Muslim terrorists. The Islamic terrorists in Sudan and Lebanon had approved and endorsed the action of the London terrorists and threatened to kill every hostage in the Catholic Church and every student in the Christian school if the demand of their Muslim brothers in the UK is not fulfilled. The United Nations and the Human Rights Organization all over the world urged Christians in the Muslim and Arab world to avoid any social and religious gatherings to avoid any further crisis. The UN offices in Khartoum and Lebanon promised to send some representatives to negotiate with the terrorists the freedom of the hostages. However, the United States of America is against negotiating with Muslim terrorists. The President of the USA said anyone who negotiates with terrorists will become like them. Some people discuss the issue of the hostages in a moral way. According to the adherents of utilitarianism, the life of one individual woman must not be spared to allow many innocent people killed in London, Khartoum, and Beirut. Those people believe that for the sake of protecting the life of the Sudanese author of the controversial book, the lives of those innocent hostages in the UK, Sudan, and Lebanon must not be sacrificed. Such a proposal is rejected by many people on the ground that it is against Western ethics and values. It is against human rights too. No matter what the outcome of such a crisis would be, many people suggested that the government of the UK must not compromise or yield to the evil demand of those Muslim terrorists. While the discussion was going on regarding what the British government should do to end the crisis of the Muslim terrorists, the Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihal came out of her hiding place and made a strange suggestion. She decided to surrender herself to the Islamic terrorists and save the lives of those innocent hostages in the hospital in London, the Catholic Church in Khartoum, and the Christian school in Beirut. She said she did not want many innocent people to be murdered because of her. The British government had strongly rejected her proposal on the ground that it was against Western values and principles and against human rights too. no author would be handed over to terrorists to be killed for the sake of saving the lives of other hostages. Besides that, it would be a defeat for human freedom of expression and a victory for the Muslim terrorists. Then the Muslim terrorists in London gave 24 hours as a deadline for killing their hostages if the British government failed to hand over to them the blasphemous author. To appease the Muslim terrorists and gain extra time, the British government had promised to put some restrictions on the sale and circulation of the controversial book in question and bring its author to a fair trial. The government had also promised not to arrest any one of those who took part in the taking of the hostages. Despite such a compromise, the Muslim terrorists rejected the two promises of the British government and insisted on fulfilling their single demand. When the 24 hours had passed, the London's terrorists killed a couple of hostages and threw their murdered bodies out of the hospital. The Islamic terrorists in Lebanon and Sudan had done the same evils. After that, the Muslim terrorists in London extended the deadline by another day. The killing of some hostages became an alarming problem for the international community. There was an outcry all over the world that the British government should end the crisis peacefully before it would be too late. In the meantime, some media people interviewed the Sudanese author Ibtihal. In all her interviews, she tried to make the international community understand that terrorism must be fought at its source and uprooted before the world could be intimidated and paralyzed by the Islamic terror. She gave her personal example in each interview. She was asked whether she regretted that she drafted her controversial book. Her answer was the same: she did what she was supposed to do to cut terrorism from its foundation. According to her, Muslim terrorists believe sincerely that they have a noble cause for which they are prepared to offer their lives. She argued that those terrorists are living in delusion. The Muslim terrorists are used as deadly tools by Satan to kill humanity and destroy themselves too. Unless the world makes Muslim terrorists see and understand the deception that they are victims of it, terror cannot be stopped. Some of the interviewers said to her that she is asking for the impossible. For them, her goal seemed to be unrealistic. They interpreted her goal as asking Muslims to forsake their religion or stop believing in parts of the teachings of their Holy Quran and the hadiths of their Prophet Muhammad. One of those who interviewed her happened to be a Muslim woman. She was one of those Muslim feminists who do not believe in most of the Prophet's hadiths that Ibtihal quoted in her controversial book. The Muslim feminist contended that Islam can be compatible with our modern time if it is interpreted in the right way. Dr. Ibtihal responded to her claim by saying that the teachings of the Sharia, which control and direct the lives of millions of Muslims all over the world, cannot give room to the feminists' arguments because their arguments contradict the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet of Islam. For example, on which religious authority do the Muslim feminists reject those unfavorable hadiths which are considered by those intellectual Muslim women are teaching and encourage misogyny? How can the Muslim feminists stop a Muslim man from beating his disobedient daughter and the husband from striking his rebellious wife when the Quran in Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 34 permits them to beat them? How can they stop a Muslim terrorist from implementing the verse of the sword in Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 5, or the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad in which he said he has been commanded by God to kill anyone who refuses to bear witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah? In fact, the Muslim apostate author Dr. Ibtihal gave many examples to prove her point. Then the Muslim feminist told her that anything in the hadiths that permits violence is not from the infallible prophet of God Muhammad. Regarding the verses of the Quran that give permission to the Muslim terrorists to kill those whom they labeled infidels, the Muslim feminists said those verses were meant for the 7th century society. Again, Ibtihal asked her, who has given her the right or religious authority to say those verses were for the 7th century society and those verses for the 20th century Islamic community? The Muslim feminist interviewer could not give a convincing and satisfactory answer to that question. At the end of the interview, the Sudanese apostate woman Ibtihal appreciated the Muslim feminists' efforts to make Islam compatible with the modern time, but she concluded that unfortunately very few Muslim scholars and preachers can endorse such interpretations and allow Muslims to follow and practice them. Then she referred to the case of the Sudanese thinker Mahmoud Mohammed Taha, who did what the Muslim feminists are trying to do. Unfortunately, he was arrested, tried, and condemned as a Muslim apostate, and hanged to death in Khartoum in 1983. Even all the scholars of Al-Azhar al-Sharif University in Egypt had condemned Mahmoud Mohammed Taha as a heretical thinker who deserved to be killed as a Muslim apostate. If those Muslim feminists who live in the West go to a Muslim country and try to preach their ideas, they will definitely meet the fate of the Sudanese thinker. They may be even stoned to death by ordinary Muslim people. Actually, for many Muslim scholars and religious leaders, the name a Muslim feminist is an oxymoron statement because no woman can be a Muslima and a feminist at the same time. Most Western feminists are religious and atheists who believe religion is the tool that men invented to control and abuse their female counterparts. Chapter 5. The London terrorists achieved victory. 12 hours prior to the second deadline, the London anti-terrorist police intercepted alarming communications between the Muslim terrorists inside the hospital. The terrorists communicated with each other through their cell phones and set a deadline for each one of them to trigger his explosive device and die as a shaheed, or Muslim martyr of jihad in the way of Allah, and kill the infidel hostages. The police authority announced publicly that if the British government would not comply with the condition of the Islamic terrorists, within 12 hours everyone inside the hospital would be killed. The police authority gave the members of the British government two options: either to allow the cops to conduct a risky operation and force their way inside the hospital, or otherwise hand over the Sudanese author of the controversial book to the Muslim terrorists. There is absolutely no available third alternative except those agonizing two options. The options put the government into a dilemma. If they allowed the cops to break into the hospital, that might increase human casualties, and many police officers would be killed along with the innocent hostages. On the other hand, if they would hand over the author of the controversial book, then that would be a stigma of shame on the British government and defeat of human freedom of expression and the human right to live. How could they pass the death sentence on a refugee girl who had not committed a crime, or had been tried and condemned by a court of law? Moreover, capital punishment is not allowed in the UK. Therefore, the British government had rejected both options and decided to continue negotiating with the Muslim terrorists and end the crisis peacefully. For that reason, the government promised to grant general amnesty to all those Muslim zealots who participated in the kidnapping of the hostages and bring the Sudanese author of the controversial book to justice, and the judge and his jury should be from a Muslim country. However, the trial must be conducted in a Western country. Once again, the Muslim terrorists rejected those compromises and insisted on their single demand. 6 hours prior to the deadline, the members of the British government have been left with no choice, conducted an emergency meeting in which they decided to leave the matter to the London police. Accordingly, an official permission has been submitted to the headquarters of the police and given the green light to begin the attack. The Department of the Anti-Terrorist Police planned a risky operation. The percentage of its success might be less than 20%. The police know that a direct confrontation with the terrorists would mean nothing except suicide on the part of the cops and the death of all the hostages. Besides that, there would be losses of over $2 billion in damage to the hospital equipment and buildings. There is one possibility before the cops: to throw tear gas at the main entrances before forcing their way inside the hospital. When the hospital building is filled with smoke, every water sprinkler will automatically switch on to extinguish the fire. That would lead to confusion inside the hospital, as everyone would be blinded by the tear gas. Then the cops should wait for a few minutes. If the Muslim terrorists would not trigger their explosive devices and explode their bodies, then the police officers should enter the hospital premises with their masks protecting their eyes from the tear gas. The plan does not go beyond the cops entering the premises and trying to arrest the Islamic terrorists and free the hostages. The cops had been strictly warned not to try to gun down the terrorists. Shooting a Muslim terrorist who has an explosive device strapped around his body would mean hitting a bomb with a bullet. If such a mistake happened, then the cops would help the terrorists to carry out their evil deeds and kill the innocent hostages along with them. Notwithstanding, a couple of hours before the cops were supposed to carry out their rescue operation, and before the terrorists were expected to kill their hostages, an unforeseen sudden breaking news had put a halt to both operations. The news was first broadcasted by the BBC World News, and then picked up by CNN News and Al Jazeera satellite TV. The news filled the hearts of millions of people all around the world with grief and relief. It is an opposing mixture of feelings like that of ambivalence. Many people wept and felt relieved at the same time. On the contrary, Muslims all over the world rejoiced and publicly celebrated the so-called good news. They considered it a divine intervention by their God Allah. The BBC announced that the controversial Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihal had been shot and killed by a British police officer in her hiding place. The killer was one of those few police officers who made the arrangements for the author Dr. Ibtihal's secret accommodation in the protected custody. When he was interrogated, the officer admitted his crime and said he did it to save the precious life of his beloved sick mother who is bedridden in the same hospital where the terrorists are holding its patients as hostages. The assassin police officer videotaped his crime to prove to the Muslim terrorists of London that he fulfilled their demand. He made a speech on a videotape and uploaded it on his page on YouTube. In his speech, he said to the terrorists that he has fulfilled their demand, and it is time for them to fulfill their promise by releasing the hostages. The video was convincing evidence that the London police officer had committed the murder. Some CIA agents verified the authenticity of the video and confirmed the assassination of the Sudanese author of the provocative book that stirred the rage of Muslims all over the world. Consequently, the Muslim terrorists agreed to release their hostages if some arrangements for their safe exit are made. They want the British government to grant them amnesty and safe exit out of the UK and send them to Iran or Sudan. The British government accepted their demand and promised to comply with it.